one dared ask, probably is what it says. No one dared ask. And we are on, we're going to start with verse 11 and go through verse 14. So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. So no one dared. It's kind of weird, right? Like, why would they ask if it's Jesus? Don't they know it's Jesus? Doesn't it look like Jesus? Listen, Jesus may have had some sort of difference in his appearance post-resurrection. The Bible doesn't actually tell us that. And it is possible. Are we rolling over there?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. The Bible doesn't actually tell us that, but it is possible. But I think there's something more going on here. I agree with Dr. D.A. Carson that this verse is intended to point us to the wonder of the resurrection, the awe of the disciples. They know it's the Lord. They know it's Jesus, but they're still hesitant. Well, frankly, this is all so new and weird for them, right? And so they want to say, "Is it really you?" But they don't. This reminds me of when Katie was born. So I'm going to give you a little backstory so you can understand where I'm going here. But I felt this way right now. Like, is it really you? A month before Katie was born, my brother-in-law died very unexpectedly of a heart attack. And that meant that my in-laws, who had born 3 children, now have 1. Their daughter took her own life at age 28. I never knew her. I think we would have been. And then Rick died very unexpectedly with a heart attack. And Jen was the one who found him. And so in the midst of this mourning and in the midst of this trauma, I'm getting ready to have a baby. And with Josh, I ended up having a C-section, and the doctor told me that would likely be the case for any pregnancies I would have. And so Jeff and his father and his brother owned a bookstore that had been started by Jeff's grandfather, and they all 3 worked there, but so somebody had to take care of the store. So when I went to the doctor, I had already figured this out. I wanted to have the C-section. If he was going to say it's going to be a plan C, I was going to say Friday, September 15th. Because I knew that Grandma could come down to the bookstore and help Grandpa for one day. Saturday wasn't busy. They usually only had 1 person there anyway. And then Sunday they were closed. So I would get Jeff for 3 days. And that was, at that point in time, that was about as much as I could hope for. And so I asked for that, and he says, "Okay, well, let me go see if I can get an operating room." And he comes back and he says, "I'm so sorry, but there's just not an operating room available to me at all." Hi. And so I was upset. I mean, I literally, and this is what I'm telling you, I said this out loud on my way home. I said this. "You know, you created the universe in 6 days. You could have found an operating room for me." And a few more words. And even then, I felt the Spirit of God say, "Just wait." And I looked up and I thought, what? So, September 15th comes and goes, and in the middle of the night, on September 16th, I wake up and go, what was that? Now, my date, my C-section date was Monday, the 18th. And I need to give you a little bit more backstory. No, yes, this, I'll give you part of that. My mother-in-law had a granddaughter and then had this spate of very active boys, including my son Josh, who I was convinced had ADD until I went to the first T-ball practice. And I came home and I said, it's fine. They're all like that. All those other little boys are crazy like that. And so she really wanted a little girl. Now, I would have told you that it didn't matter to me. I just want a baby. That's it. And then people would always say, yes, as a healthy baby. I'm like, no, I just want a baby. Whoever it is, I want. But I would have told you if I could special order a child from God, it would be this. It would be a blonde-haired, blue-eyed little girl with a left-handed little girl with a sparkling personality. So all of that will play into it. So I am in labor, and it's September 16th. And that, by the way, was my mother-in-law's birthday. So we go to the hospital. The doctor comes in. He says, "You're already in labor. You want to give it a shot?" And so I said, "Yeah, sure. As long as I'm in labor, I might as well give it a shot." Didn't work, and so I ended up with a C-section anyway. And when you have a C-section, they put a big sheet up in front of you because nobody wants to see that. I don't think the doctor wants to see it, but so you can't see anything. And so Katie is born, and he says, "It's a girl." And I said, "It's a girl? Really? Is it a girl? I can't believe it's a girl." "No, it's not a girl." "Really? Is it a girl?" Because on the way to the hospital, not only because I wanted a special order child, but on the way to the hospital, I said to Jeff, the sweetest thing God could do for you is give her a little girl on her own. And so we just exploded with praise. And I just kept saying, "It's really a girl? I can't believe it's a girl. Really, seriously, it's a girl." And he comes around and he holds Katie up from me. Comes around the partition and says, "Amy, we don't know everything, but we know that this is a girl." And so I got this blonde-haired, blue-eyed, left-handed little girl with a sparkling personality. It isn't that I didn't believe the doctor. I knew that he knew the difference between a boy and a girl. I couldn't believe the blessing that God had just given us, that God had just given my mother-in-law in Katie. I still feel that way about her and about all of my children. So I think that's what's happening here. They're just in awe. They're just in wonder of Christ. This is from D.A. Carson. He said this: "Perhaps it's the lack of imaginative historical reconstruction on our part that makes us hesitate to see the compelling power of this interpretation, that this is meant to draw us to the wonder of who Christ is." Gentlemen in the back, please. "It requires considerable effort to put ourselves in the places of the first disciples. The disciples had been granted the strongest possible reasons for believing in Jesus' resurrection, and indeed did so. They knew it was the Lord, but whether because they could see Jesus was not simply resuscitated like Lazarus, but appeared with new powers, or because they were still grappling with the strangeness of a crucified and resurrected Messiah, or because despite the irrefutable power of the evidence presented to them, resurrection seemed strange, they felt considerable unease, yet suppressed their question because they knew the one before them could only be Jesus. And so I believe that this is part of the wonder. It's supposed to point us to the wonder and the beauty of the resurrection. And just as he did in the upper room, Jesus is again serving his disciples. This time he's not washing their feet, but rather feeding them. All of which serve to show that the Lord's continuing So he's feeding them, all of which shows the disciples that the Lord's continuing presence and power will be with them as they fulfill the mission that he called them to. Now, this next part is called the restoration of Peter. Why would Peter need restoration?
Denied Jesus.
He denied Jesus how many times?
Right.
3 times. Okay, so Jesus is going to restore Peter to ministry. Keep that in mind. So here's the setting for this whole thing. It's in front of what we're about to read. Actually, maybe I'll read it first. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." Jesus said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." Jesus said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him a third time, "Do you love me?" And Peter said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." So here's the setting of this passage. It's in front of the other disciples. It's public. Peter's denial of Jesus 3 times had been public knowledge. Everybody around that charcoal fire knew what Peter had done. Jesus wanted Peter's restoration to himself to be likewise, to himself and to ministry, to be likewise a public event. Again, D.A. Carson says this. But physical courage was not enough that night, the night that he denied Jesus 3 times. And it was Peter also, spirit willing but flesh weak, who publicly disowned the Lord. Whatever potential for future service he had, therefore, depended not only on forgiveness from Jesus, but also reinstatement amongst the disciples. So Jesus isn't just saying, "Look, I still love you and I still have a job for you." He's also saying, all the 10 of you, you need to hear this as well. It's a solemn setting. He uses the full address for Simon, for Peter. He doesn't say, "Hey, Pete," or Peter. He says, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" There's really only 2 times in your life when you hear your full name. The first one is graduation, and the second one is when you're in trouble, right? This is just like for a way down the road thing for you. Be very careful choosing your child's middle name. Especially if you're going to name that child after someone you really love. Like, say, for example, your beloved father. The only time I heard that name for Josh was when I was angry with him. Joshua Martin Keyser. And I didn't want to say my father's name in anger. His name was Martin. I apparently did that so much that Lane picked up on it. He is Lane Allen Keyser. He believed that Allen was everybody's middle name. And when he got mad at Katie, he would say, "Katie Allen Keyser." I even heard once, "Mommy Allen Keyser." So be careful when you choose their name. But he's using Peter's full name. He's not angry, but he is serious. Last time, before something. So he says, "Do you love me more than these?" Who are the these? What is the these? And to whom is Jesus referring when he says, "Do you love me more than what?" And whom? It could be the boats and the fishing and the fish and all that. It could be, "Do you love me more than your career?" Perhaps. I don't think that's it, but perhaps. It could mean, Do you love me more than these men with whom you're working? Perhaps. Jesus could be asking Peter to make a choice. Does he want to continue fishing with his friends? Or is he willing to accept God's call of ministry on his life? I think there's a third choice. Do you love me more than these men love? Do you love me more than John loves me? Do you love me more than Thomas loves me? Do you love me more than these men? Now, when you think about this interpretation, keep Peter's zeal in mind. If everyone falls away from you, I will not fall away. I will follow you, Jesus, to death. Peter certainly claimed to love Jesus more than anyone else. In this case, Jesus may be asking Peter to examine his own faith. Peter had been a man who was very confident in his own ability to remain faithful to Christ. Now he realizes he's not as strong as he thought he was. And Jesus is graciously giving Peter the opportunity to trust him, trust Jesus, as well as God's strength rather than his own ability. Aren't you glad that we can lean on God's strength and not our own to accomplish the work to which He called? I am thankful for that every single day. So in this passage, Jesus is affirming Peter. And that affirmation began when Jesus asked them to bring the fish to shore. And Peter jumped to the task. Why? Because he was a leader. And Jesus knew it. There's some of you here in this room who are leaders. You may know it. There's a lot of you actually. You may not know it. But God does. Calling you to leadership. Where will you be? And Jesus is affirming Peter's leadership. And so Jesus is, in doing that, is affirming Peter. It began, as I said, when they jumped out of the boat, when he jumped out of the boat. The miraculous catch may have symbolized the disciples as fishers of men, maybe, we don't know. But Jesus is changing the metaphor here. Just as Jesus was a shepherd to the disciples, Jesus was calling Peter to be a shepherd to those who will come to him. One more word on your worship. You are a few days away from being halfway through high school. You will be upperclassmen next year. So like it or not, those baby freshmen and the sophomores, looking up to you. How will you lead? Where will you be? What will your example be? So, Simon, do you love me? I heard a whole sermon on this once. This whole thing. It was on the words in the Greek, and your curriculum takes this tack as well, and it may be right. It may be right. So I'm going to tell it to you. So there are two words, well, there are multiple words for love in the Greek. But the two words used here are phileo and agape. Now, agape, you have probably already heard. Agape is God's love. Agape is unconditional love. I will love you no matter what. Phileo is brotherly love. I love that they have more words for love in Greek. They have like 4 or 5 words in Greek for love because, it just doesn't say the same thing to say to my husband, I love you, and I love potato chips. It's not, it's just, there need to be different words for that, right? So agapeo, actually, it's agapeo in Greek. English, agapeo, sorry about that, oops, and I just couldn't. Okay, that's going to bother somebody.
Already.
It's too late. It's done. There we go. Oh, and I didn't. Oh, and I'm making. Oh, I'm sorry. Just drink away. Drink away. I'm sorry. So when Jesus says, "Do you love me?" He's saying, "Peter, do you agapeo me? Do you love me unconditionally?" And then Peter says back, "Yes, Lord, I love you." Now it's the same word in the English, but it's not in the Greek. He says back, "Yes, Lord, I phileo you." And the second time Jesus says, "Peter, do you agapeo me?" And Peter says, "Yes, Lord, I phileo you." So it's like Jesus is saying, "Peter, do you love me?" And Peter's saying, "Yes, I'm fond of you." The third time in this Caesarea, no, I'm not going to do it. No. Yeah, the third time, Jesus says, "Simon," in the Greek, "Simon, son of John, do you phileo me?" And Peter answers, "Yes, Lord, I phileo." Now, in this scenario, Jesus is challenging Peter to elevate his level of commitment. But Peter can't do it. Forced to lower his expectations, all of which is upsetting to Peter. Now, that, and I really respect the pastor I heard preach on this, and he has way more education than I do. But that interpretation is problematic for several reasons. And so with all the authority I have in a social studies and physical education bachelor's degree, I'm going to tell you this. First of all, the conversation did not take place in Greek. The conversation took place in Aramaic, but was written in the Greek. So who knows what the words are for Aramaic or what it meant in the Aramaic? Such nuances might not have existed or might not have been part of the Aramaic nuances for the word love. Second, John often changes up words using synonyms to break up the monotony. So it is kind of monotonous. Do you love me? Yes, Lord, I love you. Do you love me? Yes, Lord, I love you. Do you love me? Yes, Lord, I love you. And so John may have just been trying to spice it up. I don't know. And not meant anything more than that. And then finally, so although the words are used differently today, it's hard to say if there was any distinction in the first instance. That distinction between them applied in the first century. In fact, it is the church that brought agapeo into much greater use. Because agapeo is the kind of love that God has for us, the kind of love that Jesus showed us on the cross. And that word agape that we still use today, agape love, unconditional love, was made more popular or more common because of the church. And then the other thing is that Peter says, when Jesus says, "Do you love me?" Peter says, "Yes," right? Which would imply love. Isn't he agreeing with Jesus? If he wasn't agreeing with Jesus, he would have said no. But I'm fond of you, right? Or no, I don't love you. But he wouldn't say yes. So Peter here is acknowledging and accepting that he loves Jesus, even if John uses a different word. And then further, Jesus accepts Peter's declaration. He doesn't rebuke him. "Peter, do you agapeo me?" "Yes, Lord, I phileo you." "What do you mean you phileo me?" No. He says, feed my sheep, right? And so Jesus is acknowledging that. In fact, Jesus commissions Peter to ministry in this passage. So obviously Peter's profession of love is enough for Jesus. So I think it's best to see the words agapeo and phileo as basically, ostensibly, to bring back a word, synonyms in this passage. And that's not the focus of the conversation anyway. The focus of the conversation is Jesus is restoring Peter and restoring Peter to the disciples and to himself and calling Peter to tend his flock. Peter is upset, but it's only because Jesus had to ask 3 times. And Jesus asks 3 times for a reason. He asks 3 times because Peter denied him. So the same Peter who not too long ago had publicly denied Jesus 3 times while standing before a charcoal fire in the courtyard of the high priest, and that is the only other place in Scripture where that term charcoal fire is given. That same Peter who had denied Jesus 3 times just days earlier now stands with his Lord, the true high priest, in front of a charcoal fire and is publicly and fully restoring him to ministry. That is good. Amen. Now, they're walking, and as they were walking, Jesus tells Peter this. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted, but when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go. This he said to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, follow me. So they're walking, and Jesus says, I tell you the truth. Truly, truly is how it's translated here. That was reserved for Jesus' most important. And Jesus is going to tell Peter a very hard thing, that he will be martyred, that he will be crucified for his faith, and that his martyrdom will bring glory to God, glorify God. Now, how do I know that? He doesn't use the word crucified. I know that because to stretch out your hands was a euphemism, was a way of saying. And John says he told him this. What he was telling him was the kind of death he would have, and it was crucifixion. And that crucifixion would glorify God. And so glorification, that idea of glorification in John, consistently referred to Jesus' death in these terms, that his death glorified God. And so now Jesus tells Peter that his death will also bring glory to God. Because stretch out your hands was a term for crucifixion. Now, the word dress in the ESV likely means he will be bound, possibly with the fastening of ropes to the cross. And so he may be telling him you won't be crucified with nails, you'll be crucified with ropes. That was one method of crucifixion in ancient times. So Jesus had told Peter earlier, you will follow me later, meaning I'm going to die and you will follow with your own death. So Jesus is telling Peter what those words meant. Follow me means so much more than taking a walk down the beach. Follow me means it is a call to consistent, lifelong discipleship. And it's not just a call for Peter. It's a call that's given to us as well. Peter will follow Jesus to a cross of his own. And that Peter served Christ faithfully for 3 decades with this knowledge hanging over his head. That truly amazes me. He continued to do what God called him to do, and that one day he would be crucified too. However, it is also a testimony to the power of the Holy Spirit living inside. So Peter is a bit distressed. As you can imagine, if someone said that to you, he's a bit distressed. And so Peter turned and saw John, the disciple whom Jesus loved, following them. The one who also had leaned back against him during the supper and had said, Lord, who is it that is going to betray you? I think John is just trying to make sure, this is me. You understand? Y'all understand this is me. He describes himself in a couple of ways. When Peter saw him, he said to Jesus, Lord, what about this man? What's going to happen to him? If I'm dying on a cross, is he dying on a cross too? Is he going to have the same fate as I am? And Jesus said to him, if it is my will that he remain until I come, that he not die until Jesus returns, what is that to you? You follow me. So the saying spread among the brothers that this disciple, that John was not to die, that John wouldn't die. Yet Jesus didn't say to him that he was not to die. But if it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? So Jesus never said John would not die. He just said, I have a plan for him. What is that to you? It's hard to tell what Peter's frame of mind is, what his attitude is by the restoration, by his restoration. And is he resolved to glorify God at his death, or was he troubled by what Jesus told him? He was probably troubled. He wouldn't be troubled by that, right? We do know that Jesus answered him abruptly and emphatically. And that's the Greek wording would tend to that interpretation. If we were to do it in English, we would emphasize the you. You follow me. What is that to you? You follow me. Peter, this matter is not your concern. It's mine. You have one duty. Follow me. That's the AKB. And then Paul. John corrects the rumor in verse 23. And John is very old at the time that he's writing this. And so he wants to make sure the readers understand what Jesus said. Look, I am going to die unless Jesus comes back really soon because I'm really, really old. And so that's what he's saying. And then he says this. He writes this. This is the disciple who is bearing witness about these things and who has written these things, and we know that his testimony is true. John is talking about himself. Now, there are also many other things that Jesus did, were every one of them to be written. I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. So, John wants us to know that this is a true story. John is saying, as he did in the crucifixion narrative, that he saw these things with his own eyes. He saw the things written in his gospel with his own eyes. He knows them to be true. Now, could the world not contain all the books that could be written if everything Jesus had done was written? That is not hyperbole. It is not exaggeration. Before Abraham was, I am. True. The world cannot contain all that our Savior has done from creation to Calvary and beyond. We can't even fathom what he is doing now. A. Carson says, if Jesus' deeds were described, the world would be a very small and inadequate library. Now, we are going to stop here. I'm going to apply this to us tomorrow. tomorrow. And then we'll, do that little bit of quiz and, tomorrow you'll have time to study for your test. Or, so your test, I will just do. Okay? You can start off.